Personality. You either got it like a used car salesman or you lack it like a used car salesman. We're all familiar enough with personality theories, introversion and extroversion, but do we really know the definitions? You think of a cat lady living in canyons of old newspapers in a sunken house and you think that's an introvert. Think of a red-faced gym teacher yelling out of the window of his PT Cruiser at a bus full of kindergartners and you think, well, that's an extrovert. Throwing people into categories and theorizing their personalities can affect how we see them and how we treat them. It also affects how we see ourselves. The intangible qualities of both introversion and extroversion may be necessary to harness at certain points in the career path of tomorrow's lawyer. So the question becomes one of balance, self-reflection, and satellite dishes. Are we transmitting data constantly, like an extrovert? Are we quietly observing and receiving data like an introvert? Or is the goal to balance transmission and reception? Do them both at the same time and try and turn it into communication. That's what we're talking about today on Lawsome. The Introverted Lawyer. Finding the lawsome ways personality theories can help us understand lawyers and build better law firms. Let's roll.
Lawsome, the podcast for law firms. Powered by Consultwebs.
Welcome back to Lawsome, the only podcast for law firms that slices, dices, and juliennes. I am your co-host, Jake Sanders, and joining me via satellite is Chicago's Mr. Keyword Search 2018 runner-up, Paul Julius. Paul, you got the silver. How's it feel?
It feels marvelous, positive, satisfactory, nice, pleasing, welcome, gratifying, stupendous, tip-top, and up to snuff.
I wish there was a metaphor for that. Or not a synonym or...
Don't send me on another keyword search now. That was hard enough to find those.
Oh, that was good.
Thanks.
That connected it,
Subtle.
man. Oh, it's so subtle. What's on the show?
Today on Lawsome, we interview Brooklyn Law professor and author Heidi Brown about her new book, The Introverted Lawyer. We discuss 5 secrets to finding success as an introvert from womenonbusiness.com. And of course, we put Heidi on the hot bench for 10 questions we ask everyone.
Pull up a plate. It's the Hot Takes buffet.
The link today is from womenonbusiness.com. It's 5 secrets to find success as an introvert by Susan Ganellis. Really fast, the 5 steps are ID the types of interactions that energize you, find the environments that energize you, be social on your terms, recognize the right opportunities, and think of personal branding. These were really wonderful tips. And Paul, as an introvert, you have thoughts, and Jake, as an extrovert, I have thoughts. So why don't you give us your introverted hot take first?
I don't feel like talking about it right now.
Come on, just do it.
I think I'm just kidding, but actually that does kind of illustrate a point. And I think anybody who listens to the show knows I don't have any problem talking, vocalizing things or anything like that. It's not always about a social situation or being able to handle interactions. It's about a level that how that works for you inside. And some people thrive off it. And some people, more on the introverted side, it takes a good deal of effort to sustain those kind of interactions and stuff. I think a lot of these are really good, particularly number one, identify the types of interactions that energize you. That's what I'm talking about,
Mm-hmm.
Going to a wedding reception, that may be just fine for an extrovert, because
Mm-hmm.
there's all kinds of people and you can have a cocktail and you can,
Mm-hmm.
talk all night long.
Mm-hmm.
For people who, have to put forth some kind of effort or where it feels like your well of topics is running dry after a while, that can be tough.
Totally.
And I think that can expand into your workplace, particularly if you do stuff, I mean, kind of like we do here, where people are listening to what you say, where what your job is to communicate something to a larger group, right? That can
Right.
be difficult. For me, it's identifying things that can give me difficulties
Hmm.
and just accepting that, just saying, look, I know I can't get up and give the best man speech. Like that's going to be something that's going to be really hard. So I need to put a lot of thought into that and break that down.
Hmm.
But being at the wedding and just interacting with people, I'm good with that, for a certain amount of time.
You know
But
what?
let's hear counterpoint. Let's hear it from the extrovert.
Well, I think it's an interesting concept. And later on, we get into some fascinating territory because we speak so much about understanding the introvert and trying to find, if you're a mouse, how do you find your inner lion? You know, and introverts are thinking about these things. They want things planned, and maybe they need some kind of surety as they head into a social situation. So to deal with social anxiety, they want to plan things out. And I think I'm like that. I do want things planned out. When I'm about to make a knee-jerk kind of response to something, over time I've engaged so much in social situations that I'm running the record of what was successful, what wasn't, what worked, what got a laugh. How do you phrase things? What's the right delivery? Should I be loud? Should I be quiet? I'm going to say this with a Scottish accent, or no, I'm not gonna. And because there's a Scottish guy over there.
I'm
And
going to
so,
get called out.
yeah, but I'm running all those things in microseconds. And then I'm delivering a joke about the Loch Ness Monster at a business meeting. So,
Well, so that's what I was going to say. Like, how does that socialization for you? Like for me, I'm constantly internalizing this thing. Well, I mean, not constantly, but in some of those situations. So let's talk about like a business meeting. For
mhm.
me, it takes a little planning. It takes a little recognition of knowing like, okay, I have to stay within these boundaries of things I'm comfortable about. But it sounds to me like you're totally fine just winging it because you're going to be able to bring it back and it's not a problem. Like is it like a confidence level? Is
Well,
it
I respect the structure of social interaction, and I don't want to mess things up. Sometimes I'll make a joke to make people feel more comfortable. I use extroversion to pave, like as an icebreaker, like a for real icebreaker going through ice so the introverts can come through.
so do you feel like it's kind of like you're getting energy from the room? Like
Yes. I
so
feed off
stuff
of
is
that
coming in
nervousness.
and you're able to kind of process that and give it back. Whereas for me, I feel like it's very much like I'm just putting stuff out and like people are taking what I'm saying and it's hard for me to if someone makes an offhanded comment, you can work that in where maybe I might get thrown,
See,
right?
what I think is that it's introversion, extroversion, meaning I'm either going to transmit or just receive. And I
Yes.
think there's an in between, which is communication, where you're receiving and transmitting at the same time. So I'm planning ahead as I've known that a couple jokes about this type of topic, if I bring it up in the right way, will spark something. And I'm going to try and do this right now. I'm listening to this person. They just told me that the numbers are low and the mergers and acquisitions are here. And so now I have a joke about toaster strudel, something about like Pop-Tarts or how the icing never, and it's frozen in the middle, but it's crispy on the outside. I don't know if this is going to connect, but I think it stops people from their train of transmission and receiving to live in the moment and say, what? What was that?
So you could throw something. Well, I mean, but see now here it is right there. I mean, we can just make fun of stuff, whatever that comes out. It's not necessarily about the speed of things that are processed or comfort levels or anxiety. Those all may be kind of side effects or part of who you are.
Mm,
But it seems like introvert, extrovert are a bit higher level,
mm, yeah.
right? Like
Well,
we're kind of talking about what is it a motivation?
but it's silly to think that extroverts have confidence and introverts don't, because I think it could be the exact opposite. I think a lot of extroverts lack confidence, so they'll start blabbing.
That's a good point.
An introvert will lack confidence and won't say anything, so you just don't know. And that's that Abraham Lincoln quote, or whoever said it on the internet first. But
yeah, right. But it gets more dangerous, I think, when, and this may be more specific to introverts, is that, if you let your extroversion run away with you, the only thing is people are going to be like, well, if that guy schedules a 20-minute meeting with you, make sure you set aside 40 minutes because he's just going to talk and talk and talk. Whereas an introvert, if you get consumed by those things, no one will ever hear what you say, Man,
but I think it's like the boundaries you respect, the structures you want to support. So my takeaway from all this is that extroverts need to be as thoughtful as the introverts. And you need to have reflective moments, and you need to plan for social anxiety, and you should be doing that. But what you should be doing is allowing and opening up the option for other personality types to engage. And extroverts are the people that need to maybe step away from the wheel.
Well, and I think too, but to get to the larger thing there, I don't think we want anybody to feel like they have to, not be
something they're not. Yeah,
exactly.
Great
Whether
point.
you're an introvert or an extrovert, and I think Heidi says that pretty well in her interview, that a lot of times there's this fake it till you make it, or get up there and put on your lawyer suit and be the lawyer, and like that's not natural. And she has some really good tips to make that natural, where you can make that confidence be confident just by doing a little introspection and looking into your past. She's got some great points in her book, 7 easy steps you can do to sort of get into there, because whether you like it or not, people look at extroverts as the model. Like that's, everybody wants to be the guy, or the girl. Like you want to be the popular, talkative, gets along with everyone, can win over a jury,
But can you create behaviors that have a lasting effect? And it's not just a passing moment. I'm not just looking for a big reaction. I'm actually looking for interaction. And
that's being genuine, isn't that what she says?
Being respectful. Yeah. Yes. No, it's a brilliant interview. Yeah. Well, let's go to it.
Okay,
fine.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
We really have a relationship with Consultwebs that goes beyond simple business-to-business marketing. We have grown up with them as a company. They were there for us when we started. We were there for them when they started.
So I think that we were Consultwebs' first personal injury client 15 or 16 years ago.
I've been working with them directly for 10 years now, and they've always been a fantastic partner.
It's vitally important to us that when somebody says you should hire Bellick & Fox, and they go to the Bellick & Fox website, they're going to go beyond the website and contact us.
They understand storytelling, they understand technology, they understand a website isn't just text on a page, it's how you create an expectation for what that means to work with us.
When we get a case, they are very excited in a really genuine way that I think reflects the fact that they sort of view their success tied to ours. So that's why we've continued to use them.
I've never had anything but praise for how they've been able to market our website.
Go to consultwebs.com to learn more.
And now, for a lawsome interview.
Professor Heidi Brown is currently the director of the legal writing program at Brooklyn Law. A prolific scholar and author on the importance of legal writing, Professor Brown has published 4 books on predictive and persuasive legal writing in federal litigation, as well as numerous scholarly articles for law journals. And she's just finished her latest book, The Introverted Lawyer. Prior to Brooklyn Law, Heidi was an associate professor at New York Law School. She's had 20 years of legal experience, handling everything from complex contract and business development disputes, litigation, arbitration, big law, little law, trial law. And if it wasn't enough, in 2014, Heidi was appointed to the Fulbright Specialist roster, and since she studies Italian, we can only imagine that she'll be using the international teaching grants to disappear into the Tuscan sun. Before she travels the world, we've managed to borrow a slice of Professor Brown's time here today on the Lawson Podcast. Heidi, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So explain the career path from introverted lawyer to best-selling author who is helping the introverted.
Well, when I went to law school, I did not actually have a great philosophical reason for going to law school other than I had originally wanted to be the first female orthopedic surgeon to the Washington Redskins football team, but I had sort of issues with blood every time my father would take our giant St. Bernard and I would accompany him to the vet. And I did not do great with sort of doctor-patient scenarios. So I went to law school right out of college, and I was not the student that had my hand waving in the air. I did not understand the Socratic method, sort of being in the hot spot. I was not thriving in that educational environment, but I really loved the research and writing part of law school. And I ended up landing a great summer associate job at what happened to be a very hard-hitting construction litigation firm. So it was an office full of extroverts. I was, again, the sort of reader, studier, and brief writer, which I loved, but I didn't really get that excited about doing hard-hitting depositions or courtroom work, although it was definitely part of my job. So when I was a junior associate, I kept listening to all the advice, fake it till you make it, just do it. Like we could just put on a pair of Nikes and bungee jump off a cliff into litigation nirvana. But those strategies just weren't working for me. But I kept doing them because I wasn't very self-aware. I didn't know really what introverts were. I just thought, wow, I'm the only one that's struggling with public speaking anxiety or performance fears. And I thought, this is the career I chose. I just need to do it. And I kept doing that. Really unsuccessfully from a personal happiness standpoint for about 15 years. I just kept pushing myself to do all those activities and litigation tasks, thinking if I just did it enough, the fear and anxiety would go away. But clearly that was not the right strategy. When I transitioned into teaching, about 15 years into my 20-year litigation career, I was working on a case out in California, and I was invited to start teaching legal writing. And what I noticed is that my best, brightest, most insightful legal writers were also the quietest students and the most fearful. So sort of a light bulb went off or on, and I thought, okay, somebody has got to start researching this and understanding why our quiet or introverted or shy or even socially anxious students can really thrive in the writing aspect of being a lawyer, but not so much in the performance aspects. And can we do something to help them and me, myself, amplify our voices, but being authentic? Because faking it was not working for me. So I started researching introversion, shyness, and social anxiety in the legal context. And that's what led to my research and writing the book eventually.
Going into introversion, extroversion, how can somebody tell which one they are? Is it always obvious? Cursory glance at the terms. Most people think you're either the guy who won't shut up or the guy that never speaks. So is that kind of too simplistic? What have you learned when you went into the research of introversion and extroversion?
These labels are definitely too simplistic from what I've learned. It's not always obvious. And the reason is because society and TV and movies kind of tells us that introversion is bad and extroversion is good. So a lot of times, if we are naturally quiet or we process stimuli and information internally, which is what introversion is, and I can explain that a little bit more, we feel that we have to fake extroversion. We have to fake confidence or exude enthusiasm when really, which is what I started discovering for myself, when I just allowed myself to be that quiet, active listener, kind of deeper thinker, thoughtful writer, I was able to process my thoughts more clearly. And then when I was ready to take them prime time, they came out so much more clearly and confidently. So the difference really is And it took me a long time to really understand the difference and then analyze myself so then I could help other people figure out what these categories are that apply to them. Introverts process information and stimuli and energy internally, and whereas extroverts process all of that outwardly. And there's science that actually says that introverts use different longer neurological pathways in our brains. So that's why it takes us longer to go from perceiving something, thinking about it, processing it, sort of vetting and testing how we feel about it until we're finally ready to speak about it. Whereas extroverts kind of immediately can bounce ideas off their conversation partners. They thrive on, it's sort of like the Times Square level of stimuli, whereas an introvert can handle Times Square for about 5 minutes, an extrovert might be able to hang out there for a day. And we process that kind of stimuli in group meetings, in brainstorming exercises, in classrooms, in courtrooms. And so for introverts, we can do all of that and do it well, but then we sort of hit a point where we need to get away from it all and recuperate energy by being alone or doing something in a quiet environment or just kind of being around nature or a pet or just calming music and things like that. But it's not always obvious because in business environments and in the legal profession, introverts receive the message that they need to be extroverted. So we extrovert ourselves, and then that just has a sort of a slippery slope into being more exhausted, more overstimulated. And in reality, if we just embrace our introversion and know what things can trigger us to get overstimulated quickly and adapt mechanisms to help us power through those events better, and then really set boundaries for when we need to just be introverted. I need an introvert moment, and that's okay.
So let's talk about the book itself. The impetus behind writing it is kind of discovering your own introverted tendencies and how that personality theory kind of applies to lawyers. So tell us about more the book specifically, like before you started writing it to the end. How was that process? And then how do you feel it's been received? When did it come out? Just months ago, I mean.
Yes, it came out in August of last year, so August 2017. And the process really came from me trying to figure out a way to help my first year law students deal with performance scenarios like mandatory oral arguments or classroom participation. Law school traditionally is taught by this really kind of intense Socratic method where there's not a lot of time to reflect on your answers, and the expectations are to answer quickly and confidently and act like you know everything, when in reality that's just not true. So I started researching the differences between introversion, shyness, and social anxiety, because introversion is what I discussed earlier about processing energy, whereas shyness and social anxiety are more of a fear of judgment or a fear of criticism by the person that you're speaking to. And those are very different categories and require different levels of self-awareness and self-analysis. So I started researching those differences so I could explain them in the legal context, and then describing particular challenges in the legal world that could be hard for introverts, like those sort of immediate, spontaneous pressure situations where you're expected to speak really fast in courtrooms, making objections, negotiations, and explaining the challenges that those scenarios present for introverts, but not that we're not cut out for the law. Because that was really the message I always, if it wasn't an overt message I received from particular mentors, it was sort of subtle. Oh, if you're not excited about running to court, maybe you're not cut out for this. And my platform or my feeling is we're going to miss out on so many really important voices in the law if we tell introverts, hey, maybe you should go do something else. There are many, many resources out there about introverts in the business world and even other areas of work like the church. There's 2 books about introverts in the church, but nobody had written about introverts in the legal profession. I mean, obviously, Susan Cain's book, Quiet, she has a legal background, and her book is amazing. And I wanted to sort of take all these resources, but really intensely focus on the legal profession and talk about the assets and the strengths that quiet individuals, introverts, bring to our profession, like active listening, that time and reflection to deeply process complex legal issues, really careful, deliberate writing, creative problem solving. And then also there's science that says that quiet folks, introverts, and shy and socially anxious individuals can bring a different level of empathy because they're really listening to the person and making eye contact with the person who's speaking directly to them. So that's the first half of the book, sort of lays out the differences between introverts and other personality types, the challenges introverts can face in the legal profession, and then the assets that introverts bring to the legal profession. And then the second half of the book is the 7-step process that I've developed really to work on myself. But I wanted to break it down into practical steps I could teach and share with students and junior lawyers at law firms or different law offices in a practical, tangible way that works. I have been working this 7-step process now for about 8 years, and I have to do it every day, honestly, to process sort of my mental messages that I tell myself, and then physical ways of managing anxiety towards performance events. And I do it all the time. And writing it down into 7 steps has really helped me, and then helped me be able to help others.
Before we go into those 7 steps, I had a quick question, because you're talking about first-year law students, and I'm thinking about social media and the proliferation of it. And I wanted to ask, do you think that technology is making new law students more introverted because they can just text it or email it? No one has to say it out loud. Is social anxiety exacerbated by social media? What's your thoughts on that?
I don't think so, actually. I feel for myself that social media brings me out of my shell a little bit. And again, my whole premise is having a shell is fine. So
Right.
I don't want to say that we absolutely have to come out of our shells. But I've found, even in putting myself out there with this book, that using Instagram or using LinkedIn or Twitter, platforms I never would have considered before I did this research, it's helped me put myself out there in a different medium. And then I'm making contacts and networking in a way that I wouldn't have if I didn't have social media. I just would avoid those contacts before. And now I feel like it's helping me put myself out there in a way that I hadn't thought of before, that I feel more comfortable doing, because you can do it in smaller doses. You can sort of control your message, and you can reflect your own personality, which can be really fun and empowering.
A lot of lawyers want to write a book. You've written several of them. What advice about writing a book do you have for lawyers who think they're the next, John Grisham?
I absolutely love the process of writing a book. It's a more exciting venue for me to express thoughts and ideas than other ways that I've written in the past. And so what I recommend is, when you get a book idea, sometimes it can feel pretty overwhelming to think, I have to write 300 pages. Where do I even begin? So for me, in writing a book, I envision the whole concept, and then I literally take giant Post-its. I have these colorful Post-its, and I put them on my window of my New York apartment. And I try and break down the concept into at least 10 to 12 little chunks of material. So 10 to 12 ideas. Because if you have 10 to 12 concepts within your overall book idea, there are your chapters, or there at least are your beginning ideas of your chapters. And once I have that laid out, and obviously using Post-its is fun because you can move the ideas around and sort of see how the arc of a book will flow. Then I set a schedule for myself, a realistic schedule. Okay, if I want to write a book with really dedicated hard work, I can probably write 300 pages in a couple months, but you have to break it down into, every Saturday morning I'm going to write one chapter, or every Saturday morning I'm going to write 10 pages. And I have to make myself write every day. It's sort of part of my 7-step process that I need to get a lot of these thoughts out of my head and onto paper. So one ritual or thing that I do every day is I write morning pages, and they're inspired from Julia Cameron, the author who wrote The Artist's Way. And she recommends for any creative process or any person who wants to start a creative process to write 3 pages of what she calls morning pages of just stream of consciousness writing every morning. And so I make myself do that before I've even had a sip of coffee. And that gets the ideas that I know I want to put in my book, but I can write them without having to worry about grammar, punctuation, clarity. I get the ideas out of my head and into just a handwritten journal. And then I'm ready to actually sit down at my laptop and just do whatever I've allotted for myself that day. For me, what I recommend for any aspiring book author is you have to set a schedule and make yourself do it, even if you're not in the mood or you've got a million other things going on. And for me, that schedule is after I've done those morning pages, I work on my book project every morning from, say, 7 to 9 or 8 to 10. And whatever I finish during that time period, whether it's 1 page or the 10 pages, that's great. And then I stop and I go on with my day. So as long as you have some consistency, it really doesn't matter what you achieve during that time period. It's just the consistency of it, and you see the pages start to add up.
So to get a little bit more into the actual what you wrote, I'd like to ask about the 7 steps, but before we do, something that's popped in. Jake and I were talking about this yesterday, actually, just introvert versus extrovert, and I had a question about it because one way it was described to me, and this may be kind of separating some of the more intense parts of being a lawyer from it, but the way it was explained to me was that sometimes you can think of introversion and extroversion as like a glass. And for extroverts, when they're in social situations, it fills up their glass. And introverts, when they're in a situation, it empties the glass. So at a certain point, you're going to have to go and like recharge. It doesn't mean that you're not comfortable in a situation. I guess what I'm getting at is, do you think that introverts sometimes get a label, maybe unnecessarily, of the people who are standing in the corner quietly all the time? Like you can be social, like maybe there's different, like a line, a spectrum, something.
Degrees.
Exactly, something like that. I mean, because I think sometimes people might associate social anxiety things or something like that with introversion, where it could be kind of a stumbling block to understanding, really why you are how you are about things.
That is so true. So introverts can be very highly functioning, very vivacious, engaging social individuals. I know really fantastic public speakers and teachers and lawyers who can perform in the courtroom in those moments and cannot seem introverted at all. But what you just mentioned is so true, that they hit a point where that is enough and they need to retreat and go back to their offices or their homes or the gym or go for a walk, because it takes a ton of energy to be able to perform at that level. And introverts' energy, like the glass analogy you did, can be sapped really intensely by an amazing performance like that. So having that knowledge of yourself and awareness that that's going to happen, so you just plan accordingly. So for me, it also helps in my preparation for an event to know where my limits are. So a lot of law professors and lawyers will want to moot, M-O-O-T, moot each other before a performance. And I used to feel pressure to do that until I understood myself better and realized that practicing and rehearsing is just as exhausting for me and draining as the actual performance if other people are around. So once I stopped doing that, I was performing way better because I knew I didn't need to exhaust myself before the actual event. I have a different process. So now I allow myself to decline those lovely requests, and I say, no, that's just not part of my process. And I find I just do my thing when I'm getting ready to present something or teach or deliver a presentation, and I know that my process works for me. And then the same thing on the back end. Once I'm finished, I don't always book, post presentation dinners or have a bunch of social events the evenings after an event, because I know I'm not going to be up for that. And it doesn't mean that I'm shy hiding in the corner. It just means I know my process and I know what I need to do to really thrive and excel.
I love that. Well, thinking from an artist standpoint, both me and Paul play music and stuff. And so we do a lot of jazz, and improvisation is that thing. If you're going to show up and you practice your solo and you practice your solo and you practice your solo, and then once it comes time for the concert, you like serve up just some dry roast beef, like no one is digging it. It's because you've kind of taken all the joy out of that improvisatory moment. And there's something about harnessing anxiety in kind of a productive, creative way that could go for an introvert and an extrovert. So I think both of those people can be consummate improvisation, masters. But it's about how they apply themselves before and then what they need afterwards to kind of recoup. It's really, really fascinating.
Well, I was just going to add on to that I know, like, for me, socializing and stuff is fine. That's all cool. But I know, like, I would consider myself an introvert. And one thing that helps me is to just have a set kind of exit time. Like, no, okay, if I'm going to go to this, whatever, if I'm going to go meet friends at a party or something like that, it's 4 hours. You know what I mean? So I know, like, okay, I'm good at 4 hours. That's about time for me to go. That's about all I can take, So I think it's interesting to kind of give yourself, it's kind of like a prep. Like, I can say, okay, I know what my limits are. I know about this amount of time with this group of people. So it's fascinating to hear it from other people.
Yeah.
But anyway, so to get a little bit further into it, can you tell us a little bit more about the 7-step processes you outline in your book? And how can people take your advice and make it real?
Absolutely. And just to touch on a point that you both just brought up about improv, I agree with you that instead of rehearsing and then delivering this dry roast beef performance, I've found that introverts who present themselves authentically and genuinely, and even in sort of a vulnerable, thriving in imperfection way, it becomes so much more human and impactful. And I've really learned a lot from that really imperfection is way more interesting. even in a legal presentation, being not so smooth and perfect makes it more real and interesting and engaging. So the 7-step process in the book really came from doing the research again on myself and understanding why those many, many years, almost 2 decades of trying to just fake it and just do it over and over wasn't working. And what I learned from all the books and resources that I read in researching my book, I understood finally that there was a mental component and a physical component. And so the first 4 steps talk about mental reflection and physical reflection to try to gain that self-awareness, and then mental action and physical action. So what that really means is, and this really goes not just solely to the introversion piece, but also to the anxiety piece. In the mental reflection step, it's really finally listening to what we're telling ourselves when we anticipate a performance event and we get nervous about it or just don't want to do it because it feels uncomfortable, and reflecting on and analyzing and transcribing literally the words that pop into our brains. And it is amazing when you listen to yourself what we tell ourselves about these events that hold us back. And this is the touchy-feely part that some lawyers will resist, because you definitely have to be willing to go a little deep and think about your past and really listen to the messages we tell ourselves. But listening to them and writing them down and then trying to pinpoint the original source, it is incredible what we realize we're telling ourselves. And for me, that process involved recalling really negative messages that I have absorbed and entrenched in myself and repeated that really started back in high school. And it could be from a coach or a well-meaning mentor or caregiver or authority figure. And this is not a blame game where we're going to call them up and say, hey, you ruined my life. It's really just to say, oh, wow, I'm not hearing the voice of the judge that I'm presenting to or the law professor or the senior partner. I'm listening to my 5th grade science teacher who censored me when I finally raised my hand in class. And it's really remarkable. It sounds cheesy, but it's so remarkable how much we've been reinforcing these negative messages. So that's step 1, is realizing these messages we tell ourselves, identifying the original source, and then acknowledging, hey, that 5th grade teacher has no business being in my office today, or has no business being in this conference room today. Step 2, and this one is really a fun realization, 'cause I didn't realize how much my physical body and the way I handle myself physically was really exacerbating the struggles of being an introvert and definitely exacerbating my performance anxiety. A lot of times when we are nervous about something, our bodies instinctively go into protective mode. It's just biology. And I particularly have a blushing problem. So I turn really red every time I get nervous or flub a sentence, or when I'm imperfect, my face turns red. Or when I just get an adrenaline rush, my face is red right now. And in the past, I used to think that was a weakness. So I would wear turtlenecks and scarves and try to hide myself. And physically, I was trying to make myself small. So crossing my limbs and hunching my shoulders. And what I realized in doing this work was I was just making everything 20 times worse. I was hot. I was strangling myself. I was making myself small so I couldn't breathe. And so the physical reflection step is realizing what we do physically that's holding us back further, and understanding and really writing down again, oh, I just clenched my fist when that person asked me a question, or oh, I averted eye contact, or I'm hiding myself underneath this table, so that's the step 2, is the physical reflection. Steps 3 and 4 are sort of flipping those 2 things upside down. Step 3 is having a mental action plan, a new plan. I sort of like to regard it as the old fire drill, stop, drop, and roll. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
I just remember that in high school. And when those negative messages start to creep in, oh, I have to go to this 4-hour event, we stop, say, okay, wait, no, I can handle this now because I know myself. I have a plan. I have a substantive plan of what I'm going to talk about. I have a timing plan. I have a logistical plan. And then reminding ourselves, hey, I'm an introvert. I bring a lot to the table, and then I can leave. And then step 4 is on the physical side again, having an action plan to be physically powerful. So I realized that to manage my anxiety, I have to do a lot of physical exercise just to build my strength. So I started taking boxing lessons, and I cannot tell you how empowering it's been to bring sort of that boxing swagger into the law classroom or a meeting or some sort of courtroom event, because I know that if I can survive a 1-hour boxing session, I'm not going to pass out when I get nervous in a performance event. So first of all, the physical plan is having sort of a regimen to help you feel physically strong, but then having a plan in the moment when you instinctively cross your legs or cross your arms or hunch your shoulders or know you have a blush coming on. It's okay. You just open up your stance like an athlete, open up your arms, balance your legs, even if you're sitting in a chair. And just doing that really helps your oxygen and blood and energy flow in a more productive manner. And it is, again, incredible how just those minor, subtle physical changes can just dial down the notch of anxiety 1 or 2 notches, and then you can breathe and you can speak more clearly. It's really amazing.
Huge, yeah.
By combining those events, the mental plan and the physical plan together, the goal really is just dialing down the anxiety level just slightly, and each time it works a little bit better. And then you have sometimes it doesn't go so smoothly and you make changes. But doing this, the first 4 steps really, really can help you feel like being an introvert is a strength, and you have more information going into these events to allow you to really excel.
Going to the when you were talking about more the reflection part of stuff, that was something that really worked for me. And honestly, I wish you would have written your book like 15 years ago so I could have read it. So it's interesting because you say, whenever this situation happens, I always do this. I'm always uncomfortable when this happens, or I can't, why can't I react? In your head, you're saying, quote, normal. And you start to dig back and say, well, wait a minute. When did that start? Like, why did I start to feel that? And you're right. It's very empowering when you say, like, I own that. That's in my head. I take responsibility for that. And because it's mine, I can do something about it. Like, no one is doing this to me but me. And once you can start doing that, then you can really start to just acknowledge it. And like you were saying, like Jake was saying, how, we both play music and stuff. I mean, the first couple times getting up on stage was terrifying. But once you start to identify, like, okay, part of that is some things I'm going through, but the other part of it is, what? Everybody's terrified up here. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't normal for anyone. And just being able to kind of separate and acknowledge and say, okay, when this happens, I get queasy, but that's okay because I'm going to be queasy for 10 seconds and then it's going to go away. You know what I mean? Like, being able to sort of identify those little things, I think and own it and say, I can do something about it, is tremendously powerful.
I totally agree, Heidi. I'm sorry we had you on our podcast for you to talk, but I had a question. Because I'm thinking that introverts have to have a laundry list of like, okay, I'm feeling these negative emotions. It's tied back to 4th grade. I need to make sure I open my chest, think like an eagle. I need to breathe. I need to be strong. And don't forget that you're powerful. And introverts have to do all this crap. And an extrovert is spending all that time while you're mentally preparing yourself, going into the Counting Crows memory of your early 90s fear, that the extrovert is just blabbed all the way through and has continued to take the attention and the limelight. So I'm wondering if you could write a sequel book, because I'm listening to Paul and I'm like, it's amazing, because I think I'm an extrovert. I'm talking right after I've decided that you probably shouldn't say that. I'm already talking.
Yeah, I know you're an extrovert.
But I think of myself as an introvert because I don't want to hang out with y'all. Like, I see comedy, stand-up comedy is I love comedy. And you could see that vulnerability at work when someone says, hey, I'm not perfect. And then you're like, I really want to listen to this. And, they mix that vulnerability and control. But I'm thinking that an extrovert lawyer, like the Extraverted Lawyer, this book, it's like, what steps should you take to shut up? And do you have to open your mouth all the time? And what memories back in the day, like what historical person should have told you to shut up? And like, extroverts don't have to do any of this laundry list stuff. They're just blabbing. So it's like, introverts have to then think they have these longer neural pathways, so they have time to really drill it in and be good. But extroverts are just crapping on everything. I mean, am I wrong here? It's just kind of like, I'm thinking the sequel of this book is a short book. And it's like, here's the one step for extroverts. Shut up, maybe.
Right. Definitely. I mean, I would love to write that book.
I'll help you.
The reaction I've gotten from my book by extroverts is, wow, I never knew this was happening. And I agree with you. I think it's just raising awareness. And from sort of a leadership standpoint and a management standpoint, there are many extrovert leaders and managers who might not have ever thought about this before, and just realizing, hey, if I close my mouth now, maybe the introvert will find an entryway into this conversation. And because that's another thing about introverts, is we don't like to interrupt people, and we don't like to be interrupted. So an introvert can be in a meeting and have the best idea ever, but sort of letting it percolate, and there's never an opening to jump into the fray. So what I'm finding is that some extrovert leaders who haven't thought about this stuff before are sort of finally thinking, oh, well, maybe I need to manage meetings differently, or I need to make it okay for that introverted writer to close their door in the office. And it doesn't make them antisocial. It means that they're actually getting the work done. And sort of changing the mindset a little bit from the extrovert standpoint to, well, I don't need to force everybody to speak immediately, and I don't need to have this collaborative, open office environment, because the introverts are going to be going nuts trying to get their work done when there's noise and chaos. So I think I would love to write a book for extroverts about how to be a better extrovert.
Sure. Yeah, it's possible.
Jake, I will say one thing to about, at least personally, and I can identify a lot with what Heidi's saying about some of these, I have a blush reaction too. It only happens once. Like, you don't go through this whole thing every single time of like, okay, well, I remember being in 4th grade and it was this and it was
Right.
that. It's kind of like you sort of get through that one time, and it happens a lot faster.
Mhm.
But I think it's interesting. You do bring up an interesting point, is that there is a little bit more, obviously, introspection, but formulating a response, I think it's not so much off the cuff. You know what I mean? We're not so much just shooting from the hip, because that's what's always worked for us.
Mhm.
So there is that there.
Mhm.
Heidi, you did talk a little bit just there about some tips for managers. Like, is there? I don't know. I know, some different workplaces have people take different like profile tests, like DISC tests, or there's the, I don't know, Briggs, whatever the heck it is.
Briggs-Meyer, yeah.
Yes, thank you. Stuff like that. Can that help? Like, is there something that you have seen, either being a manager yourself, or something that you recommend to people who are in positions of managing people, to kind of help balance out the introverts and the extroverts, and make sure that everybody has their ideas heard?
Nice.
Yes. So the traditional Myers-Briggs test is really amazing and enlightening, and it's been refined really well, so you can see sort of where you fall in the introversion extroversion spectrum. There's also a faster test online called 16 Personalities, and a lot of my law students have been taking that test to figure out sort of what kind of lawyer they might want to be. Not so much, oh, I want to be a civil rights lawyer or an environmental lawyer, but do I want to be a problem solving lawyer, or a creative idea lawyer, or a putting people together kind of lawyer. The other one, there's a character strengths test out there where you can identify what your strengths are in terms of listening, communicating. So all of those tests can be done online, and I think it's a great conversation starter in management scenarios or team scenarios, to understand we're not all the same. And quite frankly, it's good that we're not all the same. And a team really should be based or grounded in different personalities and different strengths. And no one person should dominate any really effective team. And I think the more that lawyers start to look at that, because that hasn't been something that law firms traditionally have thought about. We've always had this sort of hierarchical partnership track, and not so much thinking about the human component of being a lawyer. So I think the more that law firms and law offices take a look at the people within their office space and how we can work better together and really serve the client and serve our communities better, it would really change the way we approach our profession.
Sure. And even stepping outside, like just, your office and the people you work with, that's definitely, one kind of circle. But to take it even the next thing, like people in your same practice area, or people from your alumni, or everybody calls it your networking, your networks. That's hard. it's hard sometimes to figure out a way to approach people if approaching people isn't your strong suit. So do you have any tips for networking, or networking events, or ways that maybe people who are more naturally introverted could expand their network or be more comfortable interacting with their network?
Sure. I was having a conversation with one of my students last week who's about to do her very first oral argument. And we were talking about why it's unpleasant to anticipate this. And she said it just feels so inauthentic. And we had this whole conversation about how introverts don't like, we resist inauthenticity. And so small talk and icebreakers and pair up with your neighbor at a conference and tell them something no one knows about yourself is really horrifying for introverts. So networking events can bring that same feeling of, I have to walk into this room and introduce myself to 3 people or it's not a success. Whereas I think if we approach it differently and approach it with the goal of authenticity and try to really connect with people on a human component that might have nothing to do with the law. For instance, I love the band U2, and so I always find something in any social environment that reminds me of a lyric or something with the band, and it'll just empower me in that moment. And I might even say that out loud, and then the person will either make fun of my obsession with U2, which is then a fun conversation piece, or they've been to a show or some concert. And so it just gives me an immediate something to talk about. Same thing with sports or any kind of event that's going on in the day. I try to just find one interesting non-business or non-law issue to get people talking, and it makes me feel comfortable. I also don't approach big groups. I kind of do stay on the side and observe, and I look for one other person kind of lurking on the side, and then I'll go talk to that person because they're going through the same thing I am. So instead of forcing myself into the more intimidating groups or the main person at the event, I'll look for the other introverts in the group. And then in those smaller cohorts of like-minded people, you can help each other reach out and make those human connections. And then everybody's got something interesting they want to talk about, their favorite band or their favorite activity they'd like to do. And it's just connecting on that level that really makes the difference and can get rid of that inauthentic bond and start making more authentic bonds with other people.
And I've been in situations too where, being the person who maybe is a little bit more on the fringes of it, but I'm friends with someone who's the guy standing under the light bulb, and they grab you and they're like, come here, come on in and let's get you talking to people. That's almost as uncomfortable as well. So I really like that idea of just having something. And I hate to even call it an icebreaker. It's just this is something I'm comfortable talking about, and it's pretty universally known. But it's not like a hot button thing. Like, we're not going to talk politics or religion or something like that. So that's really great advice.
The ability to throw absurdity in there, to throw like just some kind of like left hook. I think I wrote this down. We resist inauthenticity, but we strive for perfection. So there's an introversion right there. Like, yes. I don't want to be a fake fool, but I don't want to come off as a fake fool. So I'm not going to do anything. Whereas someone who just says, do you love Candlebox? Like I do. And everyone's like, it's been a long time since I heard Candlebox. And then you just throw it in there and see what happens. Somebody will respond to you. And then those are the people you can hang out with. So I think it's a powerful example because we get so professionally networked up about meeting folks and expanding our network when you realize the way to get in there is to talk about Keanu Reeves or talk about Quiche or talk about this song or like, I like Mary J. Blige. Do you? And boom, then that person knows you. Oh, by the way, we do professional liability defense, Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, then let's talk. People get it confused. I think there's a cart and there's a horse, and then people are just thinking about transportation and they don't even want to do it. They're like, I don't even want the cart. I don't want the horse. I don't want to go anywhere. And I can get it, but that we resist inauthenticity, but we strive for perfection. I think it just explains everything.
That's great. Absolutely.
Gosh. All right. Fine. Well, all right. Like an extrovert. I was just thinking too, at like focus groups where everybody have a bite of the macaroni and cheese and tell me what you think. The extrovert's going to be like, this is horrible. And then everyone's going to be like, yeah, this macaroni isn't that good. Extroverts can mislead things and completely take us on roundabout worlds. I think we rely on introverts. We need calm introspection. We need reflective thought. So the world is going to be taken over by introverts, I guess, if we can just get the extroverts to shut up.
Right. And the extroverts drive the concept of groupthink. And you're absolutely right that if an extrovert says something first and loudly, people glom onto that. And the introverts can sort of be the foil to that groupthink, because they'll come up with something no one else has thought of, and it will be the opposite of what was said at the beginning. And people will sort of take a second look at things, and you can really solve problems better that way.
God, so great. It's so impactful, and it's so wide. I mean, it's not just lawyers. It's a personality theory that's kind of underpinning a lot of moving parts. So this is a really important conversation.
Yes, indeed. It's exciting.
That's why we're recording it. So wrapping up, Professor, how can people learn more about you?
Well, I do have a website. It's theintrovertedlawyer.com. And if people read the book, they're going to know all my deepest, darkest secrets. So that's a good way to learn more about me. I also am finally, as I mentioned earlier, on Instagram at Introverted Lawyer. And I also have a Twitter account, Introvert Lawyer. So those are ways to kind of keep up with what I'm doing. I'm doing a lot of talks at some pre-law societies at colleges now, and some law schools and some law firms, which is really exciting to get the word out that introverted lawyers can really change the face of our profession.
Ten questions we ask everyone.
Here we go, Heidi, with the cleverly titled 10 Questions We Ask Everyone. Number 1, what was the last book you read?
Last book I read was a book called The Yellow Envelope, and it's a travel memoir by Kim Dynan.
Number 2, what is your best habit?
My best habit, I think, is those morning pages by Julia Cameron. I do it every day. It's more of a ritual than a habit.
That's okay. There's a fine line, but we'll accept that. Okay, number 3, and I think you just answered this, but I have to ask because that's the format. Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, or none of the above?
I prefer Instagram. I like pictures.
Okay. Number 4, coffee or tea?
Coffee, definitely.
Correct answer. Thank you. Number 5, what is your favorite place?
Rome.
Number 6, is Keanu Reeves a good actor?
Yes, and I'm thinking of the movie with the bus was an awesome movie.
Was that Speed?
Who can
Jake?
forget that bus movie?
Oh, yeah.
It was my favorite bus-centered movie.
Yeah, Sandra Bullock, right?
Oh, Speed. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Did I just say that?
I'm sorry. I was thinking of The Matrix, and I was like, is there a bus in The Matrix?
I never saw The Matrix, but
We're in it. We're inside of it, so.
All right. Number 7, what was your first job?
My first job was a lifeguard at a pool in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware.
That is an incredibly common first job.
Yeah, weird. The third person.
No. Yeah, totally. Okay, number 8. What is a skill you have outside of your current occupation that you incorporate into your work?
I think this whole boxing thing that I've developed has helped me in my current work, because I do a lot of analogies to it, and it just makes me feel strong.
Love it.
Cool.
My brother did some boxing training when he was young. Not a boxer at all, just kind of a fitness thing. And the thing that impressed him was the whole science of how you move around. And it's not just like two people wailing away at each other. There's actual, conception of how it's supposed to go. So
Yes.
It's very cool. Very cool.
It's very mentally and obviously physically challenging, but very mentally challenging.
Absolutely. Number 9. What sites, blogs, or newsletters do you regularly check in with?
I started reading a new blog called Teach Law Better. And I read ABA for Law Students blog. Those are 2 that pop into my head right now.
And we have made it to the end. Number 10. After a long day or a long week at work, how do you relax and unwind?
I usually go work out, and then I watch endless hours of Criminal Minds, Law & Order SVU, or HBO boxing.
Nice. I would have loved if you were like, I get in the ring and just beat the hell out of some kid.
Well, I do train at Trinity Boxing Gym downtown in Manhattan, and it's one of the most intimidating environments to first walk into. And once I'm in there, though, and they wrap my hands and they put me in the ring, it's like the world just becomes a happier place for me. So that's a good way to start off my evening.
For show notes, links, and info, go to www.consultwebs.com/lawsomepodcast. Be sure to leave us a review and rating in iTunes or wherever you find the you listen to. Until next week, stay lawsome.